Welcome to Day 24 on the Trail. We have 4 readings for today. From Luke 12, verses 13 through 34, Genesis 40, verse 1 through 41, verse 57, 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1 through 4, verse 43. And by the way, we are coordinating the genealogies from 1 Chronicles back to those in Genesis. And then finally, Sirach chapter 31, verses 1 through 31. Now, we will not be covering Sirach today. However, there's some great material here on table etiquette, and I hope you'll take a look at that as well. In Genesis 40 and 41, we continue the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph is still imprisoned in Egypt. However, the dreamer now becomes the dream interpreter. While imprisoned, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker both have dreams and are unable to understand them. Joseph, who now has a leadership role in the prison through God's blessing, interprets their dreams. For the baker, the news is unfortunate, to say the least. But for the cupbearer, the news is much better. The cupbearer will soon be restored to his original position. However, despite Joseph's request for the cupbearer to speak with Pharaoh on his behalf, the cupbearer forgets Joseph, and Joseph remains in prison. After 2 more years have passed, Pharaoh has 2 dreams which terrify him. When none of Egypt's wisest officials can interpret the dreams, the cupbearer remembers Joseph. Joseph is brought to Pharaoh's court to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Notice that Joseph is very careful to give all the credit for the interpretation to God. It is God who reveals the interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, not Joseph himself. This is seen in verses 16, 25, 28, and 32. Also, Joseph seizes this opportunity to go beyond the interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, but to suggest a plan of action. He shows Pharaoh ways that Egypt can be protected against the 7 years of famine which are coming. Finally, despite being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and falsely imprisoned for an extended period of time in Egypt, Joseph still seeks the best for the people of Egypt. Turning to Luke chapter 12, we find the crowds that are following Jesus are continuing to grow. And despite the size of the crowd, Luke decides to focus on one particular question. In verse 13, someone in the crowd asked Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who appointed me to be a judge or an arbiter over you?" First off, we will find that throughout the Gospels, Jesus asks questions, not to be difficult or evasive. Instead, Jesus is helping people to explore the truth, to find the root issue that is actually driving their questions. In this story from Luke, Jesus is not interested in getting in the middle of a family dispute. However, he is interested in the family. To drive the point home, Jesus tells a parable about a man who is already wealthy. But one season, his crops produce abundantly, well above and beyond their normal yield. Therefore, he decides to build bigger barns to store the excess produce. First, we have to ask an important question. Did this farmer have enough room to store his crops? And the answer is, yes, he did. He had room to store his normal crops. What he did not have room for was the abundance that he experienced. So in reality, the rich man had 2 options. He could build bigger barns, which is a complex, difficult, and expensive undertaking, or he could have simply shared what he had. He could have shown generosity to those in need. Instead, he decides to focus on himself and his greed. Perhaps he wanted to build up his personal riches, or maybe he wanted to create security for the future. But for whatever reason, he kept the abundance for himself. However, his plans for the future would not last the night. God said to him, Fool, this very night your soul is being demanded of you, and all that you have prepared, whose will it be? So it is for the one who stores up treasures for himself, but is not rich toward God. Being rich toward God is sharing generously with God's people, having a heart of generosity in the same way that God is generous with us. For as Jesus taught us all, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.